I hit record on my laptop's camera for the first time since everything started unraveling. My reflection on screen looked wrecked, eyes swollen from crying, hair sticking to my clammy forehead. 3 days of restless sleep had left me in a near-delirious state. I inhaled sharply and forced myself to speak. Name: Evelyn Reyes. Age: 19. College dropout, unwillingly. Reason: nightmares. Well, something worse than nightmares. A shaky laugh escaped me. I used to be a devoted Christian, still consider myself one actually, but no amount of prayer or holy water has driven away the presence that tortures me. It visits at night, pressing its weight on my chest, whispering in a language I don't recognize. Except sometimes I hear a word that rings in my brain like a distant bell. Arabic, maybe? I'm not entirely sure. When I was young, 8 I think, I discovered a crumbling book in my grandmother's attic. The text looked arcane, the pages covered in symbols. My mother caught me muttering phrases from it, and she threw the book away, scolding me for tempting the devil. I assumed she was overreacting. Turns out she wasn't. I ended the first recording abruptly. Rewatching my haunted stare, I almost convinced myself I was losing my mind. But I knew better. The bruises on my thighs each morning spoke to a violation that I couldn't fully remember. If it was just in my head, why did I wake up with these marks? The camera kept rolling. I had no energy to shut it off. I curled up on the bed, letting tears stain the sheets. Maybe, I thought, if I documented everything, someone might understand. Maybe I'd catch evidence of the thing crawling into my bed at night. Before dozing off, I mumbled, "God, if you can still hear me, I need help." Even then, I felt a flicker of shame. My faith wasn't gone, just overshadowed by raw terror that had seeped into my every waking moment. Little did I know that a single message from an old acquaintance would change my path and my faith forever. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. I slammed my palm against the bedside lamp, fumbling with the switch until light flooded the room. The camera's red rec indicator blinked from my laptop. I'd left it on overnight. My pulse hammered, and my body ached as if I'd been in a fight. That presence had visited again, creeping into my consciousness like a thick fog. In the dream, though it felt more tangible than that, it slithered beneath my sheets, pressed itself against my spine. My throat seized, my limbs frozen. A low hum reverberated through the walls, or maybe it was only in my head. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. When I finally managed to move, my breath came in ragged spurts. I scrambled to grab the laptop and rewound the footage. At first, I saw only me, tossing under the covers, whimpering. Then, at 3:08 a.m., the screen flickered. The image warped, pixelating as though jammed by a magnetic field. For a few seconds, there was a dark shape hovering near my torso. No definable features, just a mass that looked slightly hunched. Terror jolted through my veins. I almost hurled the laptop off the bed, but I forced myself to watch again, pausing frame by frame. It was real. Something had registered on camera, but too vaguely to identify. I tried to rationalize it as a glitch. My phone buzzed, a message, from my mother, urging me to attend a special prayer service. "Bring your father's rosary," she wrote. Church exorcisms had done nothing, though. They recited Latin incantations, sprinkled holy water, and the thing inside me only hissed in mockery. The haunting never ceased. I rummaged through my drawers, finding pages of old therapy notes. Diagnoses ranged from severe anxiety to possible hallucinations. The medication only dulled my reactions, never silencing that voice in my nightmares. A fatherly priest assured me the demon would flee in the name of Christ. Instead, it tightened its hold on my mind. Leaning forward, I forced myself to breathe. Is there any other option? I asked my reflection. My phone's browser history was littered with articles about Jinn, entities from Islamic lore said to latch onto unwary humans. I'd read that these beings can become infatuated, crossing the line into intimate assaults. It sounded outlandish, but everything else had failed. Still trembling, I started filming a new vlog, whispering, "I think I accidentally invited something years ago, and now it's not leaving." Mom always told me curiosity can be deadly. I spoke softly to the camera, my eyes hollow. Guess she was right. I sifted through old diaries, searching for entries from around age 8. Back then, I'd been restless and lonely. My father had just left us. I found scribbles referencing words that changed the air, instructions to burn candles in a certain pattern, chalk lines drawn around my bed. My latest therapist suggested exploring repressed memories, so I let the camera record while I read these scribbles aloud. Call upon he who hears your heart. 3 nights of offering your soul's desire. I felt a chill. I'd wanted my father back. Naively, I'd promised any spirit that if it brought Dad home, I'd offer my loyalty. Of course, Dad never returned, but apparently that vow lingered in the shadows. I smoothed out a childishly drawn symbol, an elongated eye circled by swirling lines. Where had I gotten that shape? My handwriting from that time was shaky, but the shape was meticulously detailed, as if I'd traced it from something older. Night fell, and dread gnawed at me. My next camera entry was fueled by coffee and desperation. I've tried priests, shrinks, medication, and it's all worthless. I breathed into the lens. This presence, he, touches me at night. I wake up sore, filthy, ashamed. I'm done looking for standard solutions. Scrolling through my phone, I stumbled upon an online post about Jinn exorcisms called Rukia. I had no clue if it was effective, but the testimonies were eerily similar to my experiences. Nighttime assaults, half-heard Arabic words, victims, losing interest in everyday life, failing academically, shutting out friends. An older acquaintance from high school, Zara, was Muslim. We'd parted ways after graduation, but I remembered she once mentioned Jinn in passing. With trembling fingers, I typed a hasty message, "I need help. It's about a Jinn. I'm serious." I debated hitting send. Would she think I'd lost it? Possibly. Yet I had nowhere else to go. I glanced around my dimly lit room, my heart pounding. Dark corners felt deeper, as if something lurked within, listening. Resolved to escape this torment, I pressed send. My prayer, ironically, was that a Muslim friend might do what no one else could. I jolted awake to sunlight burning my eyelids. My phone buzzed incessantly. 5 missed calls from an unknown number, then a text from Zara. "It's me. Call ASAP." My pulse quickened. She'd actually responded. I fumbled to call back, pressing the phone to my ear. Hearing her voice, a familiar warmth from years past, nearly brought me to tears. She spoke quietly but firmly. "Evelyn, I got your message. I believe you." The relief made my chest ache. I'd anticipated ridicule, but she offered understanding instead. She carefully explained what Jinn are in Islamic belief, beings created from smokeless fire, invisible but capable of interacting with humans. She'd heard of lover Jinn possessions, especially targeting vulnerable individuals. She also told me about Rukia, a Quran-based exorcism method used by trained imams. Her compassion shook me. Tears slid down my cheeks. "Zahra, I can't live like this anymore." She inhaled audibly. "There's a mosque near my apartment. The imam is experienced with cases like yours. Will you come?" I swallowed hard. The concept felt foreign. My Christian upbringing drilled into me that only priests or direct prayer to Jesus could save souls. Yet here I was, undone by a malevolent presence that had scoffed at every Catholic exorcism. If a different faith offered a solution, I owed it to myself to try. The day felt endless, my mind spinning with fear and fragmented hope. I packed a small bag as if I expected to be away for days, the camera rolling to document each step. My mother's calls went unanswered. I couldn't bear her disapproval of seeking non-Christian solutions. This was my life on the line. That evening, I boarded a bus to Zara's city. Rain battered the windows, the sky a dull gray. My reflection in the glass flickered whenever lightning struck. For a split second, I thought I saw a dark silhouette behind me. I whipped around. No one was there. My heart hammered so violently, I had to bury my face in my hands. Squeezing my eyes shut, I sent a silent plea. Please, God, if this is the path, don't abandon me now. Even as I prayed, I felt the Jinn's presence coil around my thoughts, as though mocking me one last time. Zara picked me up at the bus station, hugging me tight despite the heavy rain. Her kind eyes surveyed the bruises on my wrists, which I hid beneath a jacket sleeve. She knew, though. She'd done enough reading to expect visible signs of possession, or self-harm. We drove in tense silence to the mosque. The building's architecture was modest, cream-colored walls, a green dome. A calm atmosphere enveloped the parking lot. My stomach churned with nerves as we rushed inside, seeking refuge from the storm. A soft hush dominated the interior. Shoes lined the entrance racks. Zara introduced me to Imam Youssef, a gentle-faced man in his 60s. He ushered us into a small office, offering warm tea. Despite my embarrassment, I recounted the nightmares, the assaultive visions, my inability to concentrate or function. He asked precise, measured questions, never once doubting my experiences. He nodded solemnly. We'll begin with Rukia, recitation of certain Quranic verses. But you must have patience. This might take several sessions. All I could do was nod, tears silently flowing. Zara clasped my hand. I expected condemnation or suspicion, but the imam's gaze showed only empathy. We moved to a private prayer room. The imam asked me to sit on a chair. He began reciting verses in Arabic. I didn't understand the words, but the rhythmic cadence reverberated through the air. My pulse thumped erratically. At first, I felt a rising panic, as if the Jinn was resisting the intrusion of these unfamiliar holy lines. Then my chest grew tight, my vision blurred, as though the room's walls were vibrating. Zara whispered supportive words, stroking my shoulder. Imam Youssef's voice intensified, each syllable a hammer against something vile inside me. A sharp pain knifed through my head. My ears rang, and I doubled over. A low growl erupted from my throat. Alien. Not mine. The imam's voice didn't waver. My body trembled violently, sweat pouring off me in waves. I felt something intangible thrash within, an inner presence clawing to remain in control. I collapsed onto the carpet, tears flooding my eyes. For a moment, the imam paused recitation, allowing me to catch breath. An almost electric tension laced the air. I was petrified. And yet, for the first time, I sensed a crack in the entity's grip. A flicker of hope that I might finally break free from this prison of nightmares. When I regained consciousness, an hour had passed. My limbs felt weak as if I'd run a marathon. Zara sat beside me, fanning my face. Imam Youssef quietly recited more verses, this time sprinkling water on my forehead. The language washed over me in gentle waves, but each verse seemed to stoke rage inside the Jinn. I attempted to speak, but my vocal cords seized. Instead, a guttural rasp slipped out, a voice layered beneath mine, chanting in Arabic that sounded menacing. The imam raised his voice, and that second voice howled as though in agony. My fingers dug into the carpet, nails scraping at the woven fibers. I fought to scream my own words, but only that beastly hiss emerged. I'd never felt so helpless. Violated by this savage presence inside me, I worried I might lose my mind forever. Zara pressed a glass of water to my lips. "Drink," she whispered. "He's recited over it. It'll weaken it." My trembling hands gripped the glass. The water felt cleansing but sparked a sharp burn in my throat. I gagged, tears leaking down my cheeks as I forced it down. Memories flashed before my eyes. The attic ritual, the lines I chanted as a child, the overshadowed heartbreak. I realized how long this presence had been tethered to me, silently growing more powerful as I spiraled into adulthood struggles. It had exploited my loneliness, forging an intimate bond by assaulting me during my most vulnerable moments. Now it was fighting for its survival. Imam Youssef paced around me, continuing the recitation. The room spun. I clutched Zara's hand, a desperate anchor in this relentless storm. My senses flickered in and out. One moment I was hyper-aware of the faint hum of fluorescent lights. The next, blackness swallowed me whole. When I opened my eyes again, I felt a searing pain in my chest. I recognized the imam pressing his hand gently over my heart, verses still pouring from his lips. The jinn raged, but it was as though the words formed a protective barrier around my soul. My body convulsed, and I vomited on the carpet. The rancid taste made me sob in shame, but nobody flinched. Zara's grip didn't loosen. I blacked out once more, but deep within that darkness, I sensed something shifting, a massive weight loosening from the core of my being. After so many years, the jinn was losing its hold. The following day, I felt hollow, but lighter. It reminded me of waking up after a high fever breaks. Body weak, mind hazy, yet a sense that the worst has passed. I recorded a new video entry on my phone. I can't explain it all. Last night was horrifying, but for the first time, the nightmares aren't chasing me. My chest feels less constricted. It's like a million invisible claws were pulled out of my skin. Zara checked on me often. She showed me verses in the Quran about jinn, explaining that some can be malicious and cling to humans if invited, intentionally or not. The concept made me uneasy, but I couldn't deny how her faith had managed to do in a few hours what months of therapy and church exorcisms had failed to accomplish. Imam Youssef suggested more Rukia sessions to ensure the jinn was fully banished. Part of me dreaded returning to that excruciating battle, but I craved total freedom. We agreed on a second session that evening. I tried to pray in my usual Christian way, yet the words felt hollow, overshadowed by confusion about everything I had learned. My mother's texts had become accusatory, insisting I come home to proper Christian methods. I couldn't face her. Not yet. There was also an undeniable calm each time I listened to the imam's recitations. That calm offered real hope I hadn't felt in years. Zara and I chatted in hushed tones. She asked if I'd ever considered reading about Islam from a neutral standpoint, not as a threat to my beliefs, but as an exploration. I admitted I knew very little. She handed me an English translation of the Quran, inviting me to skim verses about God's oneness and mercy. I was hesitant, but curious. Sleep that night was surprisingly peaceful, though a faint echo still lingered, like an aftertaste of dread. In a half-dream, I saw the same shadow from before, but it stayed distant, growling in frustration before vanishing. I whispered a short prayer of gratitude to whatever divine presence had protected me. I woke up with dawn's light falling across my face. My mind was no longer swirling with suffocating terror. Though my body ached from the previous day's ordeal, I found myself smiling weakly at the camera lens. "I think I might survive this," I murmured, tearful relief catching in my throat. The second Rukia session was both shorter and more intense. By now, my mind recognized the pattern. The imam's voice, the recitation echoing through the quiet prayer room, Zara's comforting presence by my side. This time the jinn's retaliation was sharper, more targeted. It felt cornered, lashing out like a wild animal in its final stand. Within minutes, my pulse skyrocketed. My arms thrashed as if yanked by invisible chains. The imam's voice roared over my shrieks. I felt ripping sensations along my spine, my nails digging into my own, palms so hard that half-moon cuts bled. I whimpered in agony, the jinn shrieking in tandem. Dark spots speckled my vision, my hearing muffled as if submerged underwater. Zara dabbed a wet cloth against my forehead, murmuring soft, encouraging words. The verses thundered through my core, forcing the entity to weaken. My lungs clenched as if starved for air. Suddenly, an impossible force shoved me backward. My chair toppled, sending me sprawling onto the prayer room floor. I gasped, clawing at the air. The jinn manifested in my peripheral vision as a swirling shadow. I could sense its fury, even if I couldn't truly see it. Imam Youssef resumed the recitation, unwavering. A jolt tore through my body, and then stillness. It felt like an eternity, but it was only seconds. The hush that followed was thick, as if the walls absorbed every sound. Tears streamed down my cheeks. In the silence, the leftover heat of the jinn's presence dissipated. I felt an airy lightness within me, as though the center of my chest had finally been emptied of a parasitic weight. Imam Youssef helped me sit up, reciting a concluding prayer. My muscles twitched, but the malevolence that had clung to me for over a decade was nowhere to be felt. I looked around, half expecting a new attack, but the air was calm. Zara's eyes shone with tears. "It's gone," the imam said softly. "You're free by God's will." Free. The word settled slowly into my mind. I was alive, battered, and raw, but free. I exhaled, relief flooding my veins, and let myself collapse into Zara's arms. Over the following week, I stayed at Zara's apartment recuperating. Each day, I filmed diary entries, my attempt to process the trauma. My mother pleaded for me to return, but I couldn't. I needed space to rebuild my shattered spirit. Zara introduced me to her local Muslim community. They offered support without demanding anything in return. People I barely knew prayed for my continued healing. During this time, I found myself reading excerpts from the Quran in English, curious about the words that had banished my tormentor. Concepts like a singular God, compassion, and accountability intrigued me. My Christian upbringing had taught me many of these, but something in the phrasing spoke to my wounded heart. It felt direct, pure, no labyrinth of formalities, just me and God. The nights remained quiet, absent of the dark shape that once haunted my dreams. Some nights I still jolted awake, expecting phantom claws on my skin. Instead, I found only the soft darkness of an ordinary room. My mind still reeled with trauma, but the jinn's presence was gone. On the 6th day after the final Rukia, I startled Zara by declaring I wanted to learn more about Islam in depth. She didn't press. She simply offered to connect me with women in the community who could guide me. This new sense of curiosity was both exhilarating and terrifying. Some evenings, I locked myself in her spare room with the laptop camera running. I'd talk for hours about my regrets, my naive attempt to summon help as a child, the painful realization that I'd inadvertently invited a predator into my soul. I also spoke of gratitude for the kindness these strangers had shown, for a new perspective on faith that had saved me when my own attempts had failed. Conversion wasn't something I'd ever considered. Even now, I felt torn. My mother's convictions were ingrained in me, but the indescribable relief I felt under Quranic recitation, the tangible sense of mercy, it was undeniable. Part of me worried I'd be betraying my roots. Another part believed this path might be the only way to ensure the Jinn never returned. I recorded my final confessional video 3 weeks after the exorcism that liberated me. Used to define myself as a Christian girl who made a grave mistake. Now, I see I'm just a human being who sought divine help, and I found it somewhere unexpected. Imam Youssef had been patient, explaining basic beliefs while reaffirming that faith is a personal journey. Zara held my hand through each question, each tearful moment of uncertainty. Ultimately, I chose to embrace Islam, not out of spite, for my old religion, but out of gratitude for the powerful experience that saved my life. The day I recited the Shahada was quiet and private, no fanfare. Yet my entire being shivered with relief, as if stepping into a purifying rain. Did I feel guilt over leaving my Christian identity behind? In fragments, yes. But I knew this was my path now. My mother's anger burned in the background, but a part of her was relieved I was no longer tormented. We still speak, though our conversations are strained. Life hasn't become flawless overnight. Trauma doesn't dissolve instantly. I still flinch at shadows, especially around 3 a.m., but I no longer sense that foul presence gripping my soul. In its place is a fragile peace, something I guard with daily prayers. Some might say I simply replaced one set of beliefs with another. Let them think that if they choose. I know what I experienced. I shut the camera off for the last time, deciding I'd documented enough terror for a lifetime. This was my closure. My days would be about rebuilding, finishing my education, regaining lost friendships, and forging a bond with this new community that had welcomed me so warmly. Tomorrow, I'd be moving out of Zara's place to find my own small apartment near the mosque. For the first time since childhood, I felt lightness in my step. Evelyn Reyes no longer existed as the frightened girl enslaved by a Jinn. I was Evelyn, a survivor who had stared into a nightmare and walked out with renewed faith. And that in itself was the bravest thing I'd ever done. You made it to the end, but are you sure the story's over? Some things have a way of sticking with you, creeping back in when you least expect it. If you want more nightmares, there's another story waiting for you right here. But don't say I didn't warn you. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what would you have done differently? Or maybe the better question is, what would you do if this ever happened to you? Subscribe if you haven't already. Just don't blame me when you start sleeping with the lights on.